Tonight on Newsnight Scotland, the future of Britain's nuclear weapons. The Liberal Democrats want them slimmed down, the Conservatives want them replaced like for like, and the SNP want them out of Scotland. Which of them is right? Good evening. For more than 40 years, the UK has had a nuclear weapon system ready to fire at any time. But the question over its future exposes deep divisions across the political divide, and it's an issue that already casts a long shadow over the independence referendum debate. Here's Andrew Black.
At Faslane Naval Base on the Clyde, a Cold War of sorts continues. Campaigners at the local peace camp want to see an end to the nuclear weapons based here.
It seems to be quite black and white. Like on one side you have the peace camp, on the other side you have the nuclear submarine. And yeah, I definitely have the feeling that the world is possible somewhere in between, where we don't need nuclear weapons.
But when it comes to Trident, there's not much peace in this camp. The coalition is split on the issue, with the Conservatives wanting a like-for-like replacement with a price tag of many billions of pounds, and the Liberal Democrats backing a cheaper alternative.
The successful launch of a Polaris test missile from the submarine USS George Washington on 20 July 1960.
The UK has maintained nuclear weapons at sea continuously for more than 40 years. In the 1960s, the then Prime Minister Harold Macmillan struck a deal with President Kennedy to sell Polaris ballistic missiles to Britain before Trident was acquired by the Thatcher government in the early 80s. Few issues in politics and indeed the wider world have concentrated hearts and minds more than the existence and future of nuclear weapons. The UK government's well aware of this, but given that the lifespan of the current Trident submarine fleet won't extend much beyond the late 2020s, a decision on what happens next is going to have to be made pretty soon. Today, a Cabinet Office review on alternatives to Trident said such a move would still enable the UK to inflict significant damage and deter aggressors. It also suggested submarines could be operated at reduced readiness when threat levels are lower. And it pointed out an entirely new missile system would be more expensive than renewing Trident with 4 or 3 submarines. That's the kind of scenario the Liberal Democrats would like to see.
This country faces a big decision in 2016, and the review concludes that there are alternatives that don't compromise our national security, but do allow us to move on from the Cold War postures of the past. We can move on by ending 24-hour patrols when we don't need them and buying fewer submarines. That way, we can move down the ladder of disarmament as a country without compromising our national security.
So tell me what we're seeing.
But the Conservative side of the coalition said the Lib Dems were being naive.
Moving away from a Trident-tested system, which has protected us for over 45 years now, to try something different, potentially more costly, certainly more risky, at a time when Russia is spending $150 billion rebuilding its armed forces, including its nuclear forces. Iran is attempting to obtain nuclear warheads to put on its existing ballistic missiles. I think this would be an extremely foolhardy thing to do at this stage.
And while the coalition argues about what kind of nuclear deterrent to maintain, the Scottish Government wants the powers of independence to remove it altogether.
Westminster is trying to force Scotland to continue having Trident nuclear submarines with weapons of mass destruction based close to our biggest city. And as we know, the majority of people in Scotland don't want them in Scotland. Our parliamentarians have voted against them, both here at Westminster and at the Scottish Parliament. Our trade unions are opposed, our churches are opposed, the voluntary sector is opposed. We don't want Trident in Scotland.
The UK government won't make a final decision on the Trident replacement until 2016. That's after the next general election. Back at the Faslane Peace Camp, campaigners are determined to maintain their vigil.
Well, we did ask Danny Alexander to appear in the programme, but he wasn't available, nor were any Liberal Democrat MPs or MSPs able to speak to us tonight. We are delighted, though, to be joined by Christine Jardine, a former advisor at number 10 and Liberal Democrat candidate in the recent Aberdeen Donside by-election. Also here is Adam Ingram, the former Labour Armed Forces Minister. And in our Westminster studios, the SNP's defence spokesperson, Angus Robertson, who you saw in the film there. Christine Jordan, why do the Liberal Democrats feel so attracted to this 3 submarine option instead of 4, when according to this report, it saves hardly any money at all?
Well, what we're looking at here is that we want to look at replacing Trident with something which is not like for like, which is in the coalition agreement, and we have made clear from when into government that we do not simply want to replace it like for like, and we want to step back down, as Danny Alexander said there in the piece. We want to step away from the height of nuclear readiness.
But if you're quite happy to spend the tens of billions of pounds to replace Trident, you might as well, for a very small outlay, have the whole lot rather than a bit of it.
No, because what we're talking about at the moment is that the UK has, and is looking at, if it were to replace it like for like, having a nuclear deterrent which was designed for the Cold War. Now, we don't live in that situation anymore, and what we have to look at is a way of creating a defence system which is suitable for the 21st
having
century.
One submarine fewer is supposedly a new way of thinking that's post-Cold. I mean, this is like unilateral disarmament, but only a tiny little bit.
It's not unilateral disarmament. What we're looking at here, what this report does is set out the facts. And the 2 parties disagree on it. It sets out the facts, but it allows both Labour, it allows all 3 parties, in fact, Labour, Conservative and the Liberal Democrats, to look at the decision that will have to be made in 2016 with all the facts. And where we are coming from is that we do not want to carry on and replace Trident like for like, and we see an opportunity to roll back on the spending and on the nuclear, if you like, the scale of our nuclear deterrent and presence for a more appropriate 21st century situation. We would, none of us, as was mentioned in that, none of us actually want nuclear weapons, like nuclear weapons, but unfortunately at the moment, some are necessary.
What do you make of this idea?
What do I make of it? Well, I mean, I think you've got to read the report, and you've got to read the executive to the report. It includes makes 2 very salient points. The first is that any alternative will provide less resilience and give no guarantee the way that the constant at sea deterrence does. And it also said it may actually reduce our international standing, and also it raises the whole question of the miscalculation of risk. And those are 2 very powerful points, which I haven't heard being picked up today. So you have a report.
I don't think the miscalculation of risk thing, I don't think that's raised in the option of having 3 submarines rather than 4.
Well, I think
was raised in the context of having cruise missiles or such like.
Well, I think it also comes into the 3 as well, because the constant at sea deterrence is important, because if you have to put to sea, someone has to make a decision. Will it be determined by a vote in the House of Commons? Meanwhile, your potential aggressor may be escalating, may not be escalating. And if they're not escalating as we escalate, we create a further escalation. So constant at sea deterrence avoids that.
But what this document ignores, and what you're ignoring, is the point that Christine Jordan was making, which Danny Alexander was making, this idea of stepping down the ladder, that this is not just about the technicalities of nuclear weapons, it's a way of Britain saying, look, we are publicly taking a decision not to unilaterally disarm, but to make a step towards getting rid of nuclear weapons, which we would like other countries to join us in. I'm
not ignoring that. Actually, I'm a multilateralist. At one time, I used to be a unilateralist. But you see the changing nature of the world. You see, as Philip Hammond has said, that Iran is on the threshold of potentially getting nuclear weapons. If that happens, more countries will then seek to acquire them. We're into a much more volatile and dangerous environment in the decades ahead. And the decision that's been taken now has to be for the next 40, 50 years, not for the next 5 years.
Well, hang on. Let's give Angus Robertson a chance. Angus Robertson, I know you want these things out of Scotland, but do you think this debate about these various options is just meaningless, or do you sympathise with one side or the other in it?
Well, to be honest, it has to be seen within the prism of UK political parties, particularly the Liberal Democrats, trying to position themselves in the run-up to the next UK election, so that they can say, no, 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 we're not the same as the Tories, despite the fact we've been in coalition with them, making all kinds of bad decisions. We're actually different from the Tories when it comes to defence and the foreign affairs agenda. So that's what I think the key driver is in all of this, so that in a couple of years' time, the Lib Dems think that they will be in a place to differentiate themselves from the Tories. They're not disagreeing in essence about deterrence theory, about nuclear weapons being necessary. They're agreeing with the Tories. They're agreeing that they should be on the Clyde. They're agreeing that they should overlook Scottish public opinion. They should overlook the views of our churches, the Scottish Trade Union Congress.
Yeah, okay.
And
So what,
on.
your answer to my question is that you do think it's a meaningless debate.
Well, it's a meaningless debate or a meaningless report in as much as it didn't look at all the options. And notwithstanding the fact that between the three of us on the panel here, we have different views on all of this, the review didn't look at all of those options. And I think it behoves governments when they're about to make big decisions, and Adam says it's for decades to come, and that's true, and through life costs of around £100 billion, surely one should look at all of the options and not simply say we're going to have a debate about whether we should have 4 boats or 3 boats.
You would favour the option of getting rid of them altogether?
Absolutely. There is no reason for Scotland, a nation of 5 million
but hang on. It's not just you want them moved to England or Wales. You think Britain should just unilaterally disarm?
Yeah, well, I think that would send a very powerful signal that we need to look at the issue of nuclear arms and their place in the world in a very different way. If we follow the logic of the argument that we've already heard from other panellists, that because there are other countries that have been developing nuclear weapons, and obviously it's not just Iran, it's also North Korea. But if we follow that logic, then we're never going to scale down nuclear weapons in the armies across the world. And the UK has an opportunity to lead in that respect.
Right, let me just ask you one further question. Do you think the United States should unilaterally disarm?
Well, I think you just got to deal with the realities of the world. There is absolutely no way that the countries that have the largest nuclear weapon stocks are ever going to unilaterally disarm. I think there is potential for other countries that have to do so.
The argument against what you're saying is what you're implicitly saying is, oh, it's fine, we can do this because we'll just rely on the United States. So it's implicitly saying, well, we want nuclear weapons, we just don't want to have them ourselves.
No, it's not. It's just looking at the world as it exists. And I don't think anybody has ever had an expectation that countries like the United States, Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, or indeed China now, the 3 largest, most powerful superstates or larger state powers, are going to unilaterally disarm. But I think there are other opportunities in other countries to set a start. And we remember, of course, the reaction to Nelson Mandela when he made the decision about what South Africa was doing with its nuclear programme. I think he was lauded. I think the UK could take a lead if it wanted to, but there's no political willingness amongst the UK parties to do that.
Adam Ingram, can you imagine any scenario, or give us a scenario where you could imagine a British Prime Minister authorising using nuclear weapons?
British Prime Minister has taken through very intensive scenarios as to where such events could likely occur.
For people watching, just give us a scenario.
You can paint a number of scenarios. You just need North Korea to act in a completely rogue way to say they're going to fight.
North Korea couldn't attack Britain with nuclear weapons.
Hold on. To say that they're going to attack one of our allies. Angus Robertson's party, the SNP, wants to be in NATO, but doesn't want anything to do with nuclear weapons. But by the very articles of that organisation, that a nuclear threat has to be posed and has to be opposed.
Are you saying that if there was a realistic threat from North Korea to attack South Korea with nuclear weapons,
no,
the British Prime Minister...
That's not a NATO issue. That would not be. That's unlikely to be.
Well, you said our allies. You didn't say NATO.
No, but I pointed out that. Well, look, you could consider a situation where North Korea exports a capability to another state. That other state then builds a capability to launch. That launch target could well be within our area of where our immediate allies are in Europe or elsewhere. I only need to cite the way in which there was a near escalation to nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan within the last decade. What happened was, because of the enormity of what was likely to occur, the deterrence factor kicked in, and those two states then found another way to resolve their differences. Now, I'm telling you, that was a very, very dangerous environment. We had tens of thousands of troops in Afghanistan at the time. There was a potential for a nuclear attack, one on the other, and we may have been affected by it.
I'm sure a lot of Liberal Democrat rank and file watching this will have listened to Angus Robertson and thought, you know, he's got a point. That's actually what we believe.
No, I think actually
why do you lot want to sign yourself up to the Adam Ingram arguments, not the Angus Robertson ones?
Well, there are 2 points. A lot of Liberal Democrats listening to Angus Robertson's argument will have thought it was the most strange argument for unilateral disarmament of the UK because the Americans will still have weapons and the other people should have them.
Well, I don't think that's quite what he said.
It's the sort of ultimate NIMBY argument, but about nuclear weapons. None of us like nuclear weapons, but what the Liberal Democrats will be doing...
Let's just get this clear for the record. Liberal Democrats are against unilateral disarmament by Britain because it relies implicitly on US nuclear weapons. Is that what we're saying?
No. What I said
that's what you're criticising him for.
What I'm criticising him for is making an argument that makes no sense. What I'm saying is that Liberal Democrats will make their decision on what they think about this report at our conference. We will start formulating our policy on it at our conference in Glasgow.
Fine, let's not get into party procedures.
No,
you know,
but that's, you asked
what
I'm
we saying
think,
is, why don't you have the courage of your convictions and use this report today to say we'd like to go a lot further? We don't see what relevance nuclear weapons have.
We do have the courage of our convictions. We are taking this report and we will formulate our policy based on the facts set out in that.
Let's have 3 subs rather than 4.
As Danny Alexandra said today, this is an opportunity to make a statement about stepping back down the nuclear ladder, about embracing that approach which President Obama has outlined, about leading a multilateralist approach. And that is a position that we could see Liberal Democrats putting Britain in, being at the head of this move towards multilateral disarmament.
Well, Angus Robertson, if people, again, many people watching this will agree with your position in unilateral disarmament and say, well, the SNP's policy is a complete waste of time as well. I mean, moving them down the road to England, what does that do for the cause of nuclear disarmament?
Well, I think firstly we should be responsible for our own backyard, and so I think in the first instance we need to have a discussion about whether Scotland should be a normal country and make defence and security decisions on its own, which reflect the majority wish of the people, the Parliament, the government, and our civic institutions. So all of those, that range of institutions that I was talking about before, our churches, the trade unions, the voluntary sector, public opinion, majority parliamentarians, both at Westminster and at Holyrood, have voted against Trident. I think in the first instance, let's get the power to be able to make that decision. Secondly, let's make the decision and get Trident to leave. And I think that mixes the cards up in a way that allows others to think about what is the best way forward. The majority of our neighbours, the majority of our allies, even within a NATO context, do not have nuclear weapons based in their countries, and we want Scotland to be in the same situation.
We'll have to leave it there, Luke. No doubt to be continued. Thank you all very much indeed. Very quickly, Luke, tomorrow's front pages. Starting with the Herald, patients put at risk by lack of space in Scots hospitals, it says. The Telegraph, shaming of NHS as care crisis laid bare. This is the crisis in England that Newsnight were talking about earlier. And the Times, Cameron hammers Labour over failure of NHS trusts. Again, that's the story about the problems down in England. That's it till tomorrow. Good night.